Hey, how's it going today, everyone? So today I figured I'd talk yet again about Devil May Cry 5 and the potential of new content coming to the game. Now, I know people have been begging for some new content, most notably playable character DLC, and a while back there were some rumors and speculation about a possible Virgil DLC, on top of a rumor for a potential Lady, Trish, and Lucia DLC story. However, all of that still remains as such, nothing more than a rumor. But there is that possibility that it could change in the near future. And what I mean by that is recently Capcom decided to make a new Discord server that's dedicated around a variety of their products. The interesting thing to note here is that in the server they have tabs for news on specific games, most notably Devil May Cry news. Of course, there's other games such as Mega Man, Resident Evil, Street Fighter, and of course a variety of other games, but the big thing that I want to focus on here today is the Devil May Cry news tab. To me, it doesn't make sense to have a tab for a game that Capcom has claimed to be done with for the most part in terms of adding in new content. This is also the case when you consider the fact that Itsuno, the lead dev for the Devil May Cry series, is probably looking to work on other projects, with the most likely project being Dragon's Dogma 2, although other projects such as Rival Schools 3 aren't really out of the realm of possibilities, given that Itsuno did express interest in making other titles outside of Devil May Cry and Dragon's Dogma in the past. I know that the common argument right now is that, well, Itsuno was in photos with some of the dev teams from the Devil May Cry 5 development team, and then some that were outside of that development team but a part of Capcom, and that must mean that they are working on DLC for Devil May Cry 5. The problem with that argument is that, generally speaking, when it comes to DLC expansions, you won't see the main dev teams work on that kind of stuff. Generally speaking, of course. In most cases, what ends up happening is that a mix of the original dev team plus some new members, or just members outside of that dev team from other dev teams, focus on bug fixes or possible DLC, while the A team or the main team works on whatever the next project is. So just because Itsuno happens to be in photos with other Capcom developers, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are working on DLC for Devil May Cry 5. Honestly, when I first heard about it, I just couldn't help but laugh, because it's quite a reach to just assume that developers getting together suddenly means that they're working on DLC. But to somewhat pull this back to the Discord server, the timing of that being set up alongside the developer photos, on top of the recent news of the Devil May Cry 5 cast members showing off an exclusive video at the expo that they were at, things just kind of seem like they're alluding to something for Devil May Cry content-wise. Now, I understand that some people assume that there's a chance that this could be part of the anime, and while that is a interesting idea, I don't personally believe that the anime is something that they were going to be talking about at this expo, even though that the expo that they were at was centered around anime. The reason why I think that is because they specifically said that they got permission from Capcom to show it off. They didn't say that they got permission from Adi Shankar or Netflix to show off anything about the Devil May Cry anime. So, and granted, they didn't necessarily say that it was in relation to that, but if it was the case, I think they would have said that they had approval from either Adi Shankar or at the very least Netflix, and then they would have given that away, at least, that it was going to be in relation to the anime that's coming up. In this case, however, I think that the more likely thing is that it is something related to Devil May Cry in some form of content. It's possible it could be DLC. It's very possible that it could be the announcement of Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition. It could also be something entirely new, like a new game or potentially a remake. We don't know. And your guess is as good as mine until Capcom actually officially unveils it. And that's something that even Dan Southworth mentions on, I believe it was Facebook, where people saw the footage and they were asking, like, what is it? What is it? And pretty much he said the same thing. Just wait until Capcom officially unveils it. So everyone who was at the panel, they were able to see something that we as and by we I mean the public, are just not allowed to talk about or not allowed to know about per se. At least those people at the panel, they're not allowed to talk about what they were able to see, which kind of sucks. But at the same time, you have to also consider too that if Capcom is going to be unveiling something, we'll see it probably soon. And given the fact that I've already talked about what they could be showing off over at Gamescom, there's a likely possibility that they have more than Shinsekai Into the Depths and Resident Evil to show off at Gamescom. Again, we don't know. It's just something that we'll have to wait and see. So here's what I'll say. If it is DLC, then all I could really hope for is that it expands on the story and maybe can lead up into that end credits scene. Generally speaking, I'd just love to see the story expanded upon, and hopefully we'll get some new stuff to work with as well. There is also another chance that it could be Special Edition. Devil May Cry 5 Special Edition could be in the works, and I feel somewhat mixed about that because, for one, like previous special editions, it could just be that we get 1 to 3 new playable characters with really no new story and about 2 to 4 cutscenes, and I'd be really disappointed if we ended up with all that stuff again. Sure, I'd end up buying the game only because A, I like Devil May Cry, and B, I'd want to have the most up-to-date version of 5 if that's the case. But on the other hand, I think that using Virgil as a selling point constantly for Special Edition has overstayed its welcome and has worn out completely. I think that if you really want to sell people on Special Edition, it has to have something more significant. And that leads me into my second point as to why I feel as though Special Edition isn't something that I'd be super thrilled about this time around. The lack of additional content, especially in the case of story expansion, is something that I think fans are not really going to take too kindly this time around. Sure, it worked the first 2 times, but third time isn't always the charm in this case. So hopefully, rather than just putting out 2 to 4 additional cutscenes, we can actually get a fully fledged story that might be shorter than the main one, but still something that's more fleshed out compared to just 2 to 4 cutscenes. Then, of course, there's also the issue with Special Edition lacking in terms of unique moves for the individual characters that get introduced into that edition. While Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition was great, and in that game's defense, it was really nice to play as Trish again, and also really interesting to have Lady as a playable character for the first time, it would be really nice if the new added characters had some of their own unique moves that are different from Dante or just stood out from what Nero has and didn't really feel like it was the same thing, just slightly altered or with a slightly different animation. I think that in order to make these characters stand out, they're going to need something that either Nero or Dante just aren't able to do, and it would be really nice to see on that side. On a positive note though, if all of that's addressed in some way, then I would be open, or at least more open, to purchasing a Special Edition. Not to mention that there's always the possibility of it being a digital upgrade for people who already own DMC5 Vanilla if they decide to go that route. There is also the possibility that they could be unveiling a new game or potentially remakes. Now, as far as a new game, I kind of doubt it in that sense. At least, I think it would be too soon to do a new Devil May Cry already, but you never know. Sometimes you could get a new announcement for a new Devil May Cry, and it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to come out the following year. It just means that they've announced it and it's in the works and they're going to release it sometime within a year or two. There is that possibility. But there is also the possibility that they could be working on Devil May Cry remakes. And while I've somewhat touched upon this in previous videos, I think that the only thing that I didn't bring up as far as remakes are concerned is the potential of them adding in the characters from Devil May Cry 5 as playable characters into a Devil May Cry 1 or Devil May Cry 2 or even a Devil May Cry 3 remake. So you could potentially have like non-canon scenarios with V, Virgil, Nero in all three of those games, and that could be interesting for remakes, but we just don't know. I definitely am open to seeing remakes of 1 and 2, as I've mentioned in previous videos, mostly because 1 and 2, both from a visual and gameplay standpoint and also a lore standpoint, don't really hold up well, especially, at least in the lore standpoint, it doesn't hold up well with the newly redone timeline, I guess you could say, and gameplay and visuals, that's kind of an obvious, but from a lore standpoint, the big thing is that the first 2 games don't really line up well with the new continuity and stuff like that. So hopefully in the case of Devil May Cry 1, 2, and 3 remakes, they can address those continuity errors, and I believe I have talked about that in previous videos, so I'll leave an iCard or something on the video so that way you guys can click those and check out those previous videos, so that way you can hear my full thoughts on potential Devil May Cry remakes. But again, that's beside the point. Anyway, I think I've gone on a bit of a tangent on unlikely possibilities and what ifs, so with that I'd like to wrap up today's video, but before I do that, I'd like to know, out of curiosity, what do you all think? Do you think it's going to be DLC? Do you think it's going to be special edition? Do you think it's a new game or remake? Or do you think it's possibly the Devil May Cry anime? Let me know down in the comments below. I know that Gamescom 2019 is about a week away from today's recordings, so Capcom could be preparing multiple announcements and reveals, so I think we're bound to see something come, you know, maybe August 20th to, I think it's the 25th, that's the last day. So there's a chance that we could see some pretty big stuff from Capcom this time around. But that's all I really have to say for today. Feel free to like the video, share it, maybe subscribe and follow if you're new to the channel. And with that, I will see you all in the next one. Matane.